I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion, and this is the late Fela Kuti. Fela, Music is the Weapon is a new Canadian graphic novel exploring the life of the iconic Nigerian multi-instrumentalist and activist. We thought that the release of this book was a good opportunity to dig into Fela's legacy. Matt Amha is here to do so. Matt, how are you, pal?
Doing very well. Thank you for having me.
It's nice to have you here. Listen, before we get into the graphic novel, maybe people should understand something. What should people sort of understand to ground them in Fela in general before we even get into the graphic novel?
What should they understand about Fela Kuti? I would say that he is a kind of apostle of African music, very much in the same way that one might think of Bob Marley or Peter Tosh in the kind of Caribbean tradition, right? And
yeah.
I think to know ultimately is like this Fela was a Trojan artist. Like he was the antithesis of the sterile, neutral, safe kind of political work that we get from pop stars today in a lot of ways. And, I came on the show some months ago and talked about Kendrick Lamar's theater of liberal Black nationalism after his Super Bowl performance. And I think using that same frame, what Fela provided us was a theater of revolutionary Pan-Africanism and, the kind of art that we just really don't have in our discourse anymore.
There's a framework that Fela is very comfortable stepping into, and we can't talk about him without maybe playing a few of his songs. Matt, you really wanted to talk about this song right here.
Everybody run, run, run. Everybody scatter, scatter. Some people lost some bread. Someone nearly died. Someone just died. Police they come, Hammy they come. Confusion everywhere.
So that's Sorrow, Tears and Blood by Fela Kuti. Matt, listen, when you watch the video, you see the protests in the street. What is the context for this song? What made you pick this song?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a bit of a story, but like I was kind of saying earlier, really Fela's entire canon is political, right? But I think Sorrow, Tears, and Blood, I think marks the critical juncture in his life, in his personal life, and in his political life, where, he had been engaged in this resistance movement against the Nigerian government for many years. Fela went to the U.S. and was kind of inspired by what he found there in terms of the radical language, the aesthetics of the Black Power movement. And he came to Nigeria having been kind of changed by that experience. And he became disillusioned with the Nigerian kind of post-colonial order to the degree that he wanted to create a space that was outside of state control. And so he created the now famous Kalukata Republic, which was a communal compound that was located in Lagos, in Nigeria's capital city, that he declared to be independent from the Nigerian state. It was like a semi-autonomous colony within the country of Nigeria. Yeah. It had its own kind of internal government, which he sat at the head of. And the compound housed his family, his band, dancers, and it was like a safe haven for radicals and dissidents and such. And in 1976, he released his maybe most indelible song called Zombie, which was a critique of the Nigerian military. That song was so subversive that the military would eventually launch a raid on his home in response. And so 1,000 heavily armed soldiers raided his home. And if you read accounts of the raid, I mean, there are, really terrible stories of sexual violence and, pretty brutal violence. And the military quite literally set fire to the compound, destroying Fela's archive of music. And in the melee, Fela's mother was thrown from a second-story window. She sustained injuries that eventually culminated in her death. Fela then famously carried his mother's coffin to the residence of Nigeria's head of state, placing blame for her death directly at his feet. But to get back to the song, that song, Sorrow, Tears, and Blood, was the record that he released dealing specifically with that incident and the grief that it caused. And so it is a kind of like a personal lament of loss that he suffered personally, but also a lament against political violence. And, the song is still played pretty widely at political demonstrations across the continent today.
There's a thing that happens when you choose to make music that actually acts in the world as a representative of your view and of your politics, and people sort of listen to it and say, yes, me too, I subscribe to that as well.
Exactly.
Fela, Music is a Weapon is this new graphic novel. This is why we're talking here. So it's a brainchild of Nigerian Canadian artist Jibola Fagbamie and written by Canadian comic book writer Conor McCreary. You checked that out. Talk to me about it. What did you like about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I should say first is that what I love is that the fact it exists, right?
Okay.
I mean, that we have the capacity to be able to tell our own stories in this way and to lionize, but also, critically account for our cultural heroes as well. I think, this document, does not shy away from the politics of the time. It provides a pretty rigorous survey of the kind of social and political dynamics that undergirded that moment in African and Nigeria's history. And so, it's exactly the kind of work that I would have loved to have access to as a young person growing up, but, frankly, even today.
Fans of Fela would know him as the man behind Afrobeat, which is not to be confused with Afrobeats. That is the term that we kind of use now to describe, a music that is emerging largely out of West Africa. We're talking about people like Wizkid. We're talking about Burna Boy. Is there a through line here? Is there a through line between what Fela did and Afrobeats?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, the thing that Fela originated, Afrobeats, is kind of our main reference point for kind of modern African music.
Yeah.
Afrobeats is singular. It is like a fusion of Ghanaian highlife, jazz, funk from the US, and sounds that are more kind of distinctly Nigerian.
Yeah.
Afrobeats is a contemporary invention. It is plural. It's like, and, frankly, the title is elusive and inexact in a way that I know many artists, some of the ones that you've even named, have kind of taken issue with the label of Afrobeats because of that it kind of fails to sufficiently describe the complexity of their sound, right?
Yeah.
And so Fela, to answer your question, is the through line connecting both traditions. Like the thing that he created is the structural primer for the thing that followed, but they're ultimately distinct from one another, but people often will confuse that. I mean, what I should say too is that Afrobeats is a big tent to the degree that, I often hear people using it as a frame for all African music, even referring to like Amapiano as Afrobeat and, things of that nature, with obviously African music, African people will take issue with.
Oh, I would just say, like, that's the problem with the phrase Afrobeats, is that it becomes like, it's like when people talk about Africa as a country, like it sort of becomes, it has the nice thing, which is like it unifies, hey, there's music coming out of a region and we should describe it in this way, but it also has a reductive element to it. And that's a thing to sort of worry about. We can't have this conversation without talking about some of the problematic parts of Fela's legacy, including the history of misogyny, the history of homophobia. Do you want to contextualize a little bit of that? Do you want to talk about like who Fela was and some of those elements of his story?
Yeah, I think it is undeniable to some degree that, Fela's personal life and some of his kind of public statements reflected misogyny and homophobia, right? We should be really clear in saying that, like, some of his music and even accounts from people that were in his life at the time depict a man that often, demeaned women and expressed homophobic views. Like, this is also a guy that was known as a womanizer, again, kind of in the tradition of Marley, I think, in some ways, right? These are real parts of his legacy, I think. But at the same time, what I would say is that Fela Kuti was a man and a product of his time. And, Nigeria and Africa in the 1970s and 80s was socially conservative in many ways and for many reasons. And, that isn't to excuse his behavior, whatsoever, but I think it helps to explain the contradictions in his life and in his politics. Like, this is a radical political dissident and an Afrobeat revolutionary on one hand that had, deeply flawed personal attitudes in his personal life on the other.
We have 30 seconds left here, but October is Fela month. That's when this graphic novel is going to come out. There's a bunch of big celebrations planned around his legacy and his life. As we head into those celebrations, what are some of the things that you're going to be thinking about when it comes to Fela Kuti's legacy?
I'll be thinking about the politics and the degree to which the things that Fela identified as issues in life, like what was essentially his mandate as an artist, continues to live on today, right? And like his music was a kind of diplomacy that I think is sorely needed in Africa today. And we're decades removed from his death, and Africa, Nigeria has still not found his heir. And I think in some ways we may never find one.
I think to have artists who are so explicitly willing to name political processes that are at work for everybody involved, and to have people say, yes, that's what feels true to me too, that is a gift that can't be replaced. I think that sort of connects to the Bad Bunny conversation we were having a little bit earlier. I appreciate you and your time and your insight, man. You're the best. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me, my friend. I appreciate it.
Yes, of course. Matt Amha is a writer and culture critic from Toronto. The graphic novel, Fela, Music is a Weapon, is out on October 7th. In the meantime, my name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. The show is called Commotion. By the way, you can find us on Instagram. We are Commotion CBC. We're also on YouTube. You can watch this entire conversation, and you can watch Matt Amha be an Arsenal fan. And it's the worst thing in the world, but you know what? I don't mind it. My name is Elamin. We'll see you tomorrow.